Ladies, gentlemen, those with identity issues, my name is Elite02K and welcome to a new video. Today we're going to be talking about the Civil War, the American Civil War, with a mindset of neutrality. We're going to be talking about the North's perspective, the South's perspective, and the external entities perspective all together. So first, let me welcome in the spirit of Uncle Otis, as we normally do when we talk about American history. Yes. How do I look in the camera? Amazing. Way too much like Hank Williams Jr. Anyways, the problem with the Civil War is that the entirety of it is not exactly spoken of openly. A lot of historians believe that it was a war entirely made of slavery v. abolitionists. However, that is not always the case in this one. So let's get into it, starting with the very beginning and pre-Civil War lead-up. So in 1812, the United States and its colonies in that time fought a second war against the British over pretty much Britain fucking with America's colonies via water trade routes. The northern routes through current-day Canada. The British, still extremely salty that a bunch of hillbillies with muskets and attitudes defeated them for independence in the 1770s. The British warships and escort ships were told to prevent American naval tradesmen from reaching destinations on time, extorting them for tariffs, and even causing a few crashes between American merchant ships and British Royal Navy vessels. Obviously, we know that America won out the war, and Britain was forced to learn the same lesson the second time in 50 years, which is they are only good for three things. Number one, dying in world wars. Number two, losing wars without American help. Number three, pretending that they are the pinnacle of society, even though Britain is a gigantic hunk of shit island nation that has committed more war crimes and atrocities than almost any other culture besides Genghis Khan and the Vikings. Now, you might be asking, Daniel, what does the War of 1812 have to do with the Civil War? It is 50 years earlier, and a lot of those people who fought on the American side were dead by the 1860s. I get it. You're correct. You're right. However, America used slaves in the war against the British, and there was a lot of sentiment that these slaves fought and died for their country and should be free, especially growing in the North where slavery was almost entirely illegal outside of a few instances and building projects headed by companies. That's right. There's a ton of evidence that there was slavery involved in construction projects and farming plantations in the North. There's records showing that Detroit was partially built by slave labor, Washington, D.C. after the War of 1812, the burning of the White House in 1814, and then a lot of the Capitol around that was burned and pillaged by the British troops and canonry. So that's the relevancy. Let's scoot forward just a little further. The Mexican-American War of 1848. Similar situation where the South added infantry troops to fight in Mexico that were slaves and gave a mostly false promise of them gaining their freedom. The North was completely aware of slaves being sent to fight and die, and this grew the abolitionist movement a little bit further. So, here we are. I'm out of breath already. This sucks. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act is passed, opening up the western territories to the slave trade. Abraham Lincoln was angered by this and began to campaign for the 1860 election, running against Southern Democrat Stephen A. Douglas. Now, Douglas was a pro-slavery American politician, as with all Democrats were back then. And Lincoln was a northeastern Southerner who spent a lot of his life in the Midwest and the North during his time of education and gained an abolitionist mindset. So Lincoln ends up winning the 1860 election, seeing this as a complete threat to their slavery operations. Several southern states succeeded the Union regarding federal overstep of their constitutional rights. A few more states would succeed the following months. This is often disregarded by historians since most successionary movements in documents that those states actually wrote up have words directly linking their succession from the Union to the threats to the slave trade. However, there are a lot of documents, diaries, and recorded talks amongst Southern soldiers, both before the war, during the war, and after the war, saying that they believed it was not really due to slavery, but a growing federal government overstepping and trampling on what they deemed at the time is their rights, not just to own slaves. Now, despite most historians saying that Lincoln wanted to completely eradicate slavery, this is not true. Lincoln knew that if he did that, it would cause a national divide like it did. So he ran on overturning the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Say that 10 times fast. This would have prevented the western territories from using slaves, but continuing the southern states to carry out their plantations is somewhat of a grandfather clause. So now we have... Let me read this. Texas, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Virginia on one side, and everyone else in the north with the exclusion of border states like Kentucky, Delaware, Maryland, and Missouri on the other side. So there's a few reasons why these 4 states sided with the North instead of the South, or remained neutral to both sides. Obviously, if you're a governor of a state, the last thing you want is to be a battlefield for the obviously impending war about to come. Another reason is all these border states between Union and Confederacy states. There was almost an even split between abolitionists and slaver mindsets. So, say Virginia, for one example, you'd have abolitionists on one side of the street, pro-slavers on the the other side, and then every other house was one side or the other. It was just a hard thing to divide up. So this, like I said, means it's very hard to divide up the states to form an actual border between the Confederacy and the remaining states of America. So war finally breaks out at Fort Sumter in April 1861 when Confederate forces opened fire on the Union-controlled fort. Fort Sumter is in South Carolina, so obviously we have a federal U.S.-controlled fort in the middle of a seceded state of South Carolina. That's a problem. 3 days after the Battle of Fort Sumter began, it would fall due to a lack of supplies and troop fatalities. This is obviously put a cactus under the asses of the northern states. That would increase patriotism for the North. West Virginia would secede from Virginia as the state of Virginia wanted to join the South, but a lot of people in the Northwest section, which makes up current-day West Virginia, were abolitionists, so they seceded from West Virginia to the North. So obviously we talked about the events leading up to and causing the conflict between North and South. Let's talk about battles. First one I want to talk about is, well, they're all pretty much in chronological order. So I guess we'll just do the first one. The first battle to kick us off in the war is the previously mentioned Battle of Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter was a Union-controlled federal military fort located in South Carolina, a southern Confederate state. This creates a problem for both the North and South. The North obviously had to be wary with their newfound enemies while delivering supplies to the fort. The South obviously seen this as a Union-controlled fort and a strategic location on water that could be used to easily invade the territory in the South from the North. So, April 12th, 1861, at approximately 4:30 a.m., Confederate soldiers and militia members shot a mortar flare, which is it's a mortar, but instead of exploding, it's a big ass firework. All right. So they shot one of those up in the sky, signaling an attack to other troops on the fort. There was a recorded 500 Confederate members in that assault, and 80 defending Northern Federal soldiers. This battle lasted for approximately 36 hours and resulted in a flabbergasting fuck-all deaths. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, 36 hours of muskets, flintlock pistols, and revolvers, shotguns, cannon fires, and memery. Not a single fucking person died in the battle. Now, on April 14th, Major Robert Anderson raised uniforms in a sign of surrender and prepared to leave the fort peacefully for journey to the north. Now, the next battle we're going to be talking about is the First Battle of Bull Run on July 21st, 1861, in Prince William County, Virginia. The Confederates would send men to prevent 35,000 Union soldiers from marching to the Confederate capital via road route and railroad junction. Both Union and Confederate Army members are green, which means you have a bunch of tall toddlers with guns complaining about marching for miles with wet boots and socks for the very first time ever. Major Irvin McDowell of the Union Army comes across the first signs of Confederate troops and orders artillery operators to open fire on the area. From here, the fighting continues for a few hours where McDowell orders his men to retreat and marches what's left of his men back to Washington, D.C., where he is then relieved of duty by his commanding structure. Total men fought in this is about 30,000 Union soldiers and 32,000 Confederate soldiers. Casualties amounted to 2,900 on the Union and then 2,000 for the Confederate losses. This was pretty much a bloodbath. The Confederacy had a bunch of people hiding in the woodlines, and when the Union people approached them, they all kind of encircled around the woodlines and just kind of slaughter is a bad word, but it's not. Slaughtered a bunch of these troops on the northern side, so it was a pretty bad one. So from here, we see pretty much a few minor skirmishes, some medium battles that accidentally happened where northern troops were just kind of moving near the Mason-Dixon line and then running into southern troops. But we'll fast forward a tad bit and talk about the Battle of Antietam. I think that's how that's said. Please hold.
The devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for a soul to steal. He was in a bind. He was way behind. He was willing to make a deal. When he came across this young man sawing on a fiddle and playing it hot, and the devil jumped up on a hickory stump and said, "Boy, let me tell you what."
So for scientific purposes, we're going to say it's pronounced like
Antietam.
Antietam. Sure. So the Battle of Antietam, Washington County, Maryland, September 17th, 1862. Confederate Army General Robert E. Lee, the famous Southern general whom the Dukes of Hazzard Charger, the General Lee is named after, decides to march an army into Maryland in order to seize Northern Territory and gain leverage closer to D.C., with federal troops coming in from the east. Lee suggests a strategic ground near Antietam Creek and moves himself and his troops there. The battle is intense. The North and the South takes turns with offense and defense. Thousands of small arms casings are spent. Hundreds of artillery shells are used. Close quarter battles between men, and it pretty much ends where a lot of people die hand-to-hand combat with knife combat. Eventually, after gaining inroads, the North are forced to retreat and allow control of the battlefield to Confederate forces. Pussies, only quitters quit. It's estimated that 87,000 Union soldiers between 6 different divisions fought alongside the Confederates' 45,000 soldiers between 4 divisions and 2 battalions. This overall casualties measured about 12,500, thank you autism, for the Union, and 10,400 for the Confederacy. This battle was ultimately the reason for the Emancipation Proclamation from United States President Abraham Lincoln, who was hoping for a more decisive victory. Jesus Christ, I'm stupid. From this battle, but ultimately gave the speech on the 22nd of September. The Emancipation Proclamation is a document written by Abraham Lincoln via executive order that deems and legally states that any slave within the United States, including the Confederate States, will be given their right to freedom as of January 1st, 1863. It also allowed any black male that, as a United States inhabitant, to join the United Forces. I'm having a bad night, guys. joined the Union forces and allowed any volunteers from any country to join as temporary forces. By the end of the war, 200,000 beautiful black brothers, 8,000 drunk Irishmen with attitudes, 4,000 British men who've never tasted good food in their life, and anywhere from 8 to 15,000 future Nazi German men would fight for the Union. I can't verify that last thing. Adams County, PA, July 3rd, 1863. In case you don't know what PA means, that's Pennsylvania, stupid. General Robert E. Lee and 75,000 men just recently celebrating a victory over the Battle of Chancellorsville against General Joseph Hooker. I'm gonna not. I'm gonna not. Lee and his troops, I'm an adult, begin adventuring through Pennsylvania in order to tactically acquire, let's say, supplies, food, clothing, and shelter, as the entire state of Virginia has now been turned into a battlefield, and at the time probably looks similar to a love child of Ukraine and Los Angeles today. General Hooker heads north, following Lee and his army with reluctancy to fight after Lee's overwhelming win at the previous battle. Major General Henry Heth, under commander of Lee, runs into Union cavalry while going into a town to scavenge for supplies. Infantry from the Union 1 and 11 Corps arrive as reinforcements, but the Confederates overwhelm them, and Confederate reinforcements arrive to make it even worse for the Union. 30,000 Confederates give a prostate exam to around 20,000 Union Federals, who end up retreating through fields to Gettysburg and Cemetery Hill south of the town. The next day, the Confederates wrap around the Union position, and Lee launches a heavy assault of the Union's left flank. Ferocity commences on both sides, body after body falling for hours in these fields. Despite Confederate attempts, the Union manages to hold its positions and nightfall begins. Pretty much nothing really happens at night during that time because we were all gentlemen back those days. However, day 3, July 3rd, starts with Robert E. Lee wanting to strike while he still thinks he has the advantage, and his enemy is on its back foot. He sends multiple heavy assaults and tries to prevent reinforcements from coming in by barraging behind the fighting with artillery, but the Union ends up overwhelming Lee's army and getting those reinforcements, and he orders the retreat. This is actually one of the bloodiest days in American history, as of all the people involved in the fight were American, regardless of North versus South, racist versus not racist. The Confederacy started the battle with around 73,000 men, while the Union started with around 95,000 men. Overall casualties would amount to 28,000 Confederate and 23,000 Union. Ouch. This bloody victory reinvigorates Lincoln, obviously, with the hope that this war will be won, and it will be soon. Battle after battle, day after day, Lee's luck seems to have ran out. He was eventually pushed back into Virginia, to where he would eventually surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, I think. Appomattox, Virginia? Sure. To Northern General and future United States President Ulysses S. Grant. This would happen on April 9th, 1965. While the end of the Civil War technically didn't happen for another month or two until the rest of the Confederate armed troops were found and surrendered, this was a major and fatal blow to the Confederacy. This is often regarded as to the actual loss of the Confederacy's part in the Civil War. So let's talk about overall stats, because you know I like the stats. I like facts. I love them. I do. I love facts. So, the facts are, overall, 3.2 million people fought in the Civil War on both sides, and out of those, around 650,000 either died or went missing and were never found. The Civil War is one of, if not the bloodiest times in American history, where brothers fought brothers, cousins fought cousins. cousins did fuck cousins, but Americans did fight Americans. So, while there is this sentiment that this was completely over slavery, everybody in the South was a bunch of racists, yes and no. The North passed a bunch of taxes on the South, both normal taxes and slave plantation specific taxes. So I can almost guarantee you that this was used as a narrative that the boot of the government was going to crush the neck of all of its citizens. I find it very, very hard to believe that everyone in the South actively thought it was completely over slavery. I did actually find a number. Only 0.3% of the South's fighting force had owned slaves or was the child of a slave owner. You can argue about it with me in the comments. I'm not wrong, you are. It's whatever. But thank you guys for watching. If you don't hate me and you enjoyed my video, please leave a like and subscribe. If you do so, your name goes into Abraham Lincoln, yes, actually Abe Lincoln's top hat. And whatever name I draw out of there, right, like a little magic trick, that name will have my kidney and my right testicle. No, they cannot have the left one. That one's obviously my favorite. His name is Ernie.